Good afternoon, everybody. It is January 26th, and today I want to discuss with you cold weather vegetables. Here in southeastern North Carolina, very close to the ocean, it's actually time to begin planting cold weather vegetables. And cold weather vegetables are considered to be vegetables that are frost hardy and freeze hardy, meaning that temperatures of 32 degrees and below will not kill them. And some popular examples are lettuces, kale, root vegetables like carrots, radishes, beets, snap peas, and there are a whole other wide variety of frost-tolerant, freeze-tolerant vegetables. Some other examples could be broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, spinach. The list is very, very long. You do not have to be in a climate that is past its frost or freeze date to begin gardening. And I'm going to start planting these today. The amazing thing about these vegetables is they are frost and freeze tolerant. They will freeze solid, but then once they unfreeze, they will be relatively unharmed to a degree. If you actually look at the backs of these vegetables, sometimes they tell you the frost and freeze hardiness. The lettuce in particular, like this Jericho romaine tells you that lettuce may survive 20 degrees F or lower. Use row cover to protect overwintered crops. So my climate, for the most part, maybe only 2 or 3 nights a year do we actually see temperatures that drop below 20. So what really matters to these frost and freeze tolerant vegetation, it's not necessarily the air temperature, it's actually the soil temperature. That is what is going to dictate your success with these vegetables. For example, lettuce and kale will begin germinating once soil temperatures are above 40 degrees. Beets and carrots and peas will start germinating once soil temperatures are above 45 to 50 degrees. And as the temperature in the soil rises, they will germinate more quickly and they will grow more quickly because when you add heat, chemical reactions speed up and they will grow faster. The only thing is, once soil temperatures start getting into the upper 70s and above 80, germination will tend to fail in all of these. So you're supposed to plant them in fall and spring for that reason. The other problem with these vegetables is once daytime temperatures start getting into the 80s, they'll start to bolt, which means they will go to seed. They'll shoot a stem out of the center of a lot of these, and they'll try to reproduce, generate seed, and the plant will die. So because of that, it's good to get these in the ground in the spring or in the late winter as quickly as you possibly can. And the other nice thing about these vegetables are the frost and freeze tolerance ratings of all of these vegetables actually increase when they're smaller. So lettuce seedlings, for example, are hardier than mature lettuce heads. And I don't exactly know why, but if I had to guess, it's probably because the radiated heat from being so close to the ground probably keeps them warmer. So the smaller they are, the more the ground protects them, the less chance that there will be for damage. That has always been my assumption. And some of these I grew last year, and we had a 100-year winter. My kale was damaged when we had 2 nights in a row of 8 degrees, but some of it actually survived. All of these carnival carrot blends, all of them, they all survived and they all did great. 2 nights of 8 degrees. Now, they were mostly mature at the time, but that was still pretty impressive. A lot of my beets rotted, but some did survive. These were crops that I started in October, so they were mature, and at the time I just covered them in blankets. But long story short, I want to get to the point, and I want to show you a few tips for starting your early spring or late winter vegetables. I'm going to make this video only about lettuce and kale. I'm going to make my root vegetable video in a later video that will shortly follow this. And the reason why is because in my raised beds, I want to have a bed that's dedicated to leaves and lettuces, and I want to have a bed that is dedicated to root vegetables. So I'm going to put these away for the time being, and focus these on a later video that I will link to in this, part 2 if you will, and I will focus specifically on these lettuces and kale. And this can also apply to spinach and other hardy greens. Because I live in the southeast, I have the luxury of being able to sow these directly in ground right now because my soil never freezes. And that holds true for much of the southeast, the deep south, the southwest, and the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast. The ground doesn't freeze in those locations, so you can plant lettuces and cold weather crops most of the year, if not all winter long. And some of you watching this in the Northeast or the Midwest or the Upper Plains or the Lower Plains who don't have that luxury may be saying, well, that's great. How does this apply to me? Well, you don't have to start your cold weather crops outdoors. You don't have to direct sow them if you want. You can start these indoors about 3 to 4 weeks before your date where your soil is no longer frozen. So if you think that right now in January your soil is frozen, but by the end of February your nights are comfortably in the lower to mid 20s or upper 20s, and your days are comfortably in the 50s or upper 40s, lower 60s, and your ground is no longer frozen, well, all you have to do is back out of that date about 3 to 4 weeks and start them indoors. So for many people in the lower plains or the Northeast, that may be right now. Because if spring starts to break around March 1st, that means you should begin thinking about sowing these seeds indoors now in things like peat pods and the little coconut pellets, or in smaller trays, and you can just transplant them when the conditions outside become viable. Now, as I mentioned before, the main thing that you want to ensure is that your soil temperatures are 40 degrees and rising. If you take a simple candy thermometer or meat thermometer and you jam it into your soil, you can get the temperature of the soil. And we've actually been below average the past few days, so I'm going to go ahead and take the temperature of my soil a little later on in this video to show you if I will be successful at germinating these vegetables. The next thing you want to pay attention to is what your low temperatures are going to be. If you don't think you're going to have any temperatures in the teens anymore coming up, you can start doing this. And it's late January, so average temperatures should be rising. So if you think you're comfortably out of the teens, you can go ahead and start these vegetables. If not, you can blanket them. If you feel like it's going to fall into the teens a few nights, you can use a frost cover. However, just be aware if you're still getting temperatures that are in the single digits, you shouldn't be doing this yet. But hey, if you're getting nights in the single digits, chances are your soil is going to be frozen anyway. So if you look at the back of your different packages, they will tell you what depth you should plant your seeds at and what the crop spacing should be. All of these recommended depths are 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and this one states an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch. So we're going to do about 1/4 inch depth on all of these seeds. We are also going to look at what the spacing of the plants should be. This says thin to 8 inches. This says final spacing of 6 to 12 inches. And this one says thin to 18 inches, which is pretty generous. So that is exactly what we're going to do. With seeds, you're not going to get 100% germination, so we're going to plant twice as much seed as we have to, because we want to ensure that something comes up and there are no gaps, and then when they grow, we can just pull out the additional ones that we don't need when they're babies. So I'm going to go over it, and I'm going to take you to my raised beds and show you how I do this. Okay, now the very first thing we're doing is we're going to take our candy or meat thermometer and just jam it into the soil. We want to get a soil temperature reading and ensure that our soil is at least 40 degrees. And this was a pretty average day here, so it'll tell us how warm the soil is getting when the sun is out. The second thing I want you to notice, I mark all of my beds in 1 foot increments. Each one of these marks means 1 foot. So from here to here is 1 foot, from here to here is 1 foot, and from here to here is 1 foot, etc., etc. You can see I have marks all over all my beds. And the reason why I do that is because I want to know what my 1 foot spacing is. And if you purchase one of these string lines for just a few dollars, you can go ahead and pull this string line and that will tell you exactly what 1 foot row spacing is. So if you read the backs of your packages, you'll see that you want about 12-inch spacing on all of your greens, roughly. So we're actually going to move that into the center of this row, and that string line right there is going to be it's going to be the row that we are going to put our seeds in. Now, the other thing I want to discuss with you is not overplanting. We want to practice something called succession cropping. So if you plant this whole package of seed, you're going to go from absolutely no lettuce and kale to an overabundance of lettuce and kale that you're not going to be able to eat fast enough. So this week we're only going to put in 3 rows of the 3 different vegetables. So this will be my 4-season lettuce right here. This will be a row for my romaine, and then this will be a row for my kale. So that's all we're going to do. 1 row of each, and then a week to 10 days later, I'll put in another row of each, so they all mature at different time frames. So while we've been talking, our thermometer has been adjusting, and you will see my temperature is, let's get that clearly focused, my temperature for the soil is 56 degrees, and the sun is just setting right now, so it's been beating in the sun all day, and it's now starting to cool off. So that means that we are in a perfect situation for planting our lettuce and our radishes, beets, and peas, which will be later in a later video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little shovel and I'm going to run it against the string line. And that little straight trench there is where I'm going to put my seed. I recommend that if your soil is very dry, that you wet it down very lightly first, so the soil holds its shape. Mine is still pretty damp from the overnight, so I don't have to do that. Now we'll put in our next row. And finally, we will put in our third row. And that right there gives us 3 rows with about 1 foot spacing, as you can tell from the hash marks. Both of these are about dead center. So that should give plenty of space for the plants to grow. Okay, now it comes time to actually plant your seed. If you remember, both the lettuces want mature head spacing at about 8 inches, whereas the kale wants mature head spacing of about 12 inches. So what I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to plant my seeds 2 inches apart, because I don't expect full germination, and also because my Jericho romaine and my dwarf kale seed is actually a year old, so I expect really low germination rates with them. The Four Season lettuce is it's fresher. I just purchased that about 2 weeks ago, but I'm going to overplant anyway, and just if it comes up too close, I'll just thin them out to 8 inches later. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And this by no means has to be exact. You can just ballpark it, estimate about 2-inch spacing, and a lot of times you're going to drop more than one seed in the hole just because they stick together. That is totally fine. I'm getting lots of clumps of 2 or 3 seeds dropping in at times. And lettuce seed is extremely cheap, so it's not a big deal to overplant. I think each of these packs are only about $1.50, and considering a grocery store cost for a head of lettuce is $1.50, I'd say that's a pretty darn good deal. On a side note, this is exactly why you don't want raised beds that are wider than 4 feet. Because it will become just impossible to reach the center of the bed. Now that all my seed is planted, I'm just going to gently cover them with a little bit of soil. Remember, we're only going for about a 1/4 inch depth here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but 1/4 inch just means a light covering of soil. And there you go. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to water them in. So now that it's watered, we'll check back in about 5 to 10 days. Generally that's about as much time as it takes to germinate lettuce and kale. But since it's still pretty cold and early in the season, we expect it to take longer in terms of germination. So I think probably within a week to a week and a half we should see some results, and I'll make sure to follow up on that. And just like that, our first round of cold weather vegetables have been planted. I hope you found this video interesting and informative. As I said earlier, I'll make sure to follow up this video with a similar video for my root vegetables. In the meantime, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and follow the progress. I really appreciate you watching, and we hope to see you again next time.